He had everything: wealth, fame, and a mansion that whispered silence. But behind those golden gates lived a pain no money could cure. His only daughter hadn't walked in years. Until one morning, he heard music echoing from her room. When he opened the door, he froze. The maid's little girl was dancing with his paralyzed daughter, her fragile legs trembling, moving. Almost alive again. For a moment, time stopped. What he did next would change both of their lives and shake the entire mansion to its core. It was a quiet morning in the Langford estate, a mansion that stood on acres of trimmed perfection, surrounded by marble fountains and silence. Inside, billionaire Richard Langford lived like a king without a kingdom. Since the accident that left his daughter Clara paralyzed from the waist down, joy had vanished from his home. The sound of laughter was replaced by soft medical machines and the careful footsteps of nurses who spoke in whispers. Clara, once the heart of the house, spent her days near the window, watching the garden she could no longer play in. Her father tried to fill her world with expensive therapies, music tutors, and gadgets, anything that might heal what medicine couldn't, but nothing worked. Not until the day the new maid arrived. Her name was Maria, quiet and polite, carrying the weight of hardship in her tired eyes. She had a daughter, Lena, only 10, bright as morning sunlight but shy around strangers. Richard allowed Maria to bring her along during long shifts. He didn't like it, but Clara insisted. For weeks, nothing changed. Clara remained withdrawn, her father distant, and the mansion cold as ever. But one afternoon, faint laughter echoed down the marble hallways, a sound Richard hadn't heard in years. It came from Clara's room. A piano tune played softly, and beneath it, footsteps. At first, he thought it was a recording. But then he heard his daughter's laughter blend with another child's voice. Something he hadn't dared to believe in was happening upstairs. Richard stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, listening. Each note from the piano seemed to breathe life into the silent house. Curiosity and a flicker of fear pulled him toward his daughter's room. As he climbed, he noticed something strange. Clara's laughter wasn't strained or forced. It was light, real, free. When he reached the door, he hesitated. Through the crack, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, and there they were. Lena, the maid's little girl, danced barefoot, her small arms moving like fluttering ribbons. Her face was glowing with joy. And right in front of her, Clara sat in her wheelchair, clapping, smiling, and unbelievably trying to move her legs to the rhythm. It wasn't much, just a twitch, a tremble. But Richard saw it. His breath caught in his throat. For years, no doctor had managed to make her legs respond. Yet here she was, responding to a child's laughter and rhythm. For days, he didn't say a word. He simply observed. Whenever Maria was cleaning the garden, Lena would sneak into Clara's room. They would play music, tell stories, and dance. Slowly, the two girls became inseparable, one teaching movement, the other teaching hope. Clara began to change. Her eyes shone brighter, her laughter came easier, and she started asking for things she hadn't cared about in years: music lessons, brighter curtains, a piano near her bed. Richard was stunned. It was as if life had returned to her veins, but the staff began to whisper. "The maid's daughter spends too much time in the mansion," one said. "It's inappropriate," muttered another. The butler even warned Richard that the girl was a distraction and beneath the family's image. At first, he ignored it. But as the rumors grew, so did his discomfort. What would people think if they saw his daughter, this heiress of the Langford Empire, playing with a maid's child? His pride battled his heart. Then one afternoon, it happened. Richard came home early from a business trip. The music was playing again. He followed it quietly, expecting to see Clara in her chair. But what he saw made his heart skip. Clara was standing, wobbling, trembling, but standing. Lena was holding both her hands, guiding her through slow, awkward steps. The two girls laughed as they moved, a miracle unfolding before his eyes. But instead of wonder, something darker rose inside him: shock, fear, maybe even guilt. He burst into the room. The music stopped. Clara froze. Lena stepped back, terrified. "Clara." Richard's voice cracked. What are you doing?" The silence that followed was louder than the music had ever been. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush a heartbeat. Clara stood trembling, her fingers still half locked with Lena's. Her father's eyes were wide not with pride, but with disbelief. "What is going on here?" Richard demanded, his voice echoing across the marble walls. The nurse rushed in, startled, and Maria appeared behind her, frozen at the door. Lena's small hands began to shake. I was only helping," she whispered, her voice quivering. Richard's gaze snapped toward Maria. "You let your daughter touch mine? You brought her into this room without my permission?" Maria's lips parted, tears forming instantly. "Sir, please." She didn't mean, but he had already turned away. His pride was louder than reason, and his anger wasn't truly for them, it was for himself. For all the years he'd spent buying hope instead of feeling it. "Get her out," he said coldly. The room went still. Clara's wheelchair rolled slightly as she reached toward her father. "No, Dad, please, now." Maria grabbed Lena's hand and started to leave, but before they could step out, Clara's voice broke through the silence, soft, but sharp enough to stop him in his tracks. "She made me walk, Daddy." Richard turned slowly, his expression cracking. Clara's legs trembled beneath her, but she didn't fall. "You said you'd give anything to see me walk again. Well, she did it. Not your doctors. Not your money, her." She pointed to Lena, tears streaming down her face. The truth hit him like a wave he couldn't breathe through. He looked at Lena, this small, poor girl with a heart bigger than his mansion, and felt something break inside. For the first time in years, he didn't see a servant's child. He saw a miracle, and just like that, the anger drained from his face. The mighty walls of his pride began to crumble. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with a kind of silence that changes everything. Richard stepped closer, his eyes trembling, watching his daughter's fragile legs hold her weight for the first time in years. He knelt beside her, as if afraid to breathe too hard, terrified the moment might disappear. "Clara." His voice broke, softer now. You're walking." Clara smiled through her tears. "Because she believed I could." Lena stood quietly, eyes down, clutching her mother's hand. Maria wiped her tears, unsure whether to apologize or thank him. But Richard didn't speak right away. He was staring at the piano, the same one he'd bought years ago, hoping it would heal his daughter through music. Turns out, it wasn't the music. It was kindness. The next morning, everything changed. Richard called the staff into the grand hall. For the first time, he wasn't wearing his business face. He looked human, tired, humble, and deeply moved. He announced that Maria and her daughter would stay not as servants, but as family. He arranged for Lena to receive the best education the city could offer and gave Maria a new home on the estate grounds. But more than that, he promised something greater: to open a foundation in Clara's name for children with disabilities who couldn't afford treatment. As reporters flooded the mansion. Weeks later, Clara sat in her wheelchair beside Lena, who was now her closest friend, and smiled for the cameras. But behind the flashes, the real miracle wasn't her recovery. It was her father's transformation. He had learned something his wealth could never buy, that healing doesn't always come from doctors, but sometimes from a child's heart that refuses to give up. And as he watched Clara and Lena laugh together in the garden, Richard finally understood. Sometimes, the smallest hands can lift the heaviest souls.